The world as we have known it for nearly 80 years is changing. Today is December 22nd, 2025, and a monumental shift is underway. The United States, long considered the world's policeman, has formally declared its intention to step back from this role. The recently released National Security Strategy made this clear, stating that the days of the United States supporting the world order, like Atlas, are over. This is not just a change in policy, it is a fundamental redefinition of America's place in the world. For generations, the U.S. military has patrolled the seas, maintained alliances across continents, and intervened in conflicts far from its shores. Now Washington is signaling that this era is drawing to a close, turning its focus inward. This decision raises profound questions for every nation on Earth. What happens when the anchor of the global security system decides to lighten its load? For decades, the presence of American power, for better or worse, has shaped international relations. It has deterred potential aggressors, protected vital trade routes, and upheld a certain set of rules. The withdrawal of this power creates a vacuum, and history teaches us that vacuums are rarely left empty for long. Other nations with very different ambitions and values are poised to fill the space that America leaves behind. This transition will not be smooth or simple. It promises a period of uncertainty and realignment. The implications of this shift are vast, touching everything from global economics to the news you see each day. The stability that many have taken for granted could be challenged. The cost of goods, the safety of travel, and the very balance of power between nations are all in play. We must consider what a world without an American backstop looks like. Will regional powers become more assertive? Will old conflicts reignite? Could new alliances form to create a different kind of order? These are not abstract geopolitical puzzles. They are urgent questions that will directly impact the lives of billions of people around the globe. In this new era, we must explore the potential consequences of America's strategic pivot. This essay will examine three possible scenarios that could unfold in key regions: a crisis in the Asia-Pacific, growing instability in Europe, and a dangerous escalation in the Middle East. We will also weigh the potential benefits and significant risks of this policy, both for the United States itself and for the international community. Understanding this monumental change is crucial. The decisions made in Washington will reverberate across the planet, forcing every country to navigate a more complex and potentially more dangerous world. The story of the 21st century is being rewritten before our very eyes. To understand the gravity of America's withdrawal, we must first look back at why it assumed the role of world police in the first place. After the devastation of World War II, the United States emerged as the dominant global power. Its leaders believed that the economic isolationism of the 1930s had contributed to the war. They concluded that American prosperity and security were directly linked to a stable and open world order. To prevent another global catastrophe and maintain its own standard of living, the U.S. took on the responsibility of underwriting global security. This was not just about idealism, it was a pragmatic strategy for self-preservation and economic dominance in a shattered world. This new role was legitimized through international institutions like the United Nations, which was designed in large part to support this U.S.-led order. Through massive aid programs like the Marshall Plan, America rebuilt its allies in Europe and Asia, binding them into a network of economic and military partnerships. Alliances like NATO were formed to contain the Soviet Union's expansion. The U.S. Navy began to patrol global sea lanes, ensuring that commerce could flow freely from the Strait of Hormuz to the South China Sea. This system was costly, requiring a vast network of military bases and a sustained commitment of resources, but it became the foundation of the post-war era. This American-led order, often called the Pax Americana, or American Peace, was not without its controversies or its failures. The wars in Vietnam and Iraq, for instance, exposed the limits and costs of American power, leading to intense debate at home and abroad. Yet even with these setbacks, the underlying structure remained. The U.S. continued to act as the ultimate arbiter in many international disputes and the final guarantor of its allies' security. Even after the Cold War ended, America's role expanded as it intervened in conflicts in the Balkans and the Middle East, solidifying its status as the world's sole superpower and indispensable nation. However, the immense cost of this global commitment has taken its toll. Decades of foreign wars have led to a growing wariness among the American public. Polls from recent years have consistently shown that a large majority of Americans favor bringing troops home and prioritizing domestic issues like the economy, healthcare, and infrastructure. Leaders have responded to this sentiment, arguing that America can no longer afford to be the world's policeman. The new national security strategy is the culmination of this long-brewing shift, turning the page on a historic chapter and forcing the world to confront a future where America no longer carries the burden of global order on its shoulders. When a dominant power steps back, it creates a power vacuum. This void is an invitation for other ambitious nations to expand their influence and reshape the global order to better suit their own interests. Three countries in particular, China, Russia, and Iran, stand ready to test the new limits of the international system. Each sees the American withdrawal as a historic opportunity. They have long viewed the US-led order as a constraint on their ambitions. Now, with the world's policemen looking inward, they are likely to act more boldly to assert their dominance in their respective regions, challenging the norms and alliances that have defined the post-war era. China is arguably the most significant challenger. With an economy that rivals America's and a rapidly modernizing military, Beijing has long-term plans to become the preeminent power in Asia and beyond. A U.S. retreat would embolden China to intensify its pressure on Taiwan, which it considers a breakaway province. It would also likely become more aggressive in asserting its contested claims in the South China Sea, a vital artery for global trade. U.S. allies like Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines would face immense pressure to either accommodate China's rise or risk confrontation without the certainty of American support. This could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the world's most dynamic economic region. In Europe, Russia would see an opportunity to reclaim its former sphere of influence. Despite its ongoing struggles, Russia continues to dedicate a massive portion of its budget to its military. President Putin has long lamented the collapse of the Soviet Union and sought to challenge the eastward expansion of NATO. An American disengagement from Europe would test the resolve of the alliance. Russia might be tempted to escalate its aggression in Ukraine, or even probe the defenses of a NATO member in the Baltics, such as Estonia or Latvia. This would force European nations to confront a direct military threat on their continent without the immediate and overwhelming power of the US military to back them up. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, Iran would be emboldened to pursue its regional ambitions with greater vigor. Freed from the constant threat of American intervention, Tehran would likely accelerate its nuclear program, potentially crossing the threshold to become a nuclear-armed state. It would also increase its support for proxy forces in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, challenging U.S. allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia more directly. This could trigger a regional arms race, with other countries in the region deciding they too need nuclear weapons to counter Iran. The result would be a far more volatile and dangerous Middle East, with the potential for conflicts that could disrupt global energy supplies. Imagine a tense morning in the Taiwan Strait. Chinese naval vessels, under the guise of a military exercise, enforce a full blockade around Taiwan. Commercial ships are turned away and air traffic is halted. This is not an outright invasion, but a quarantine designed to slowly strangle the island's economy and force its government to capitulate to Beijing's demands. In a world where the US has stepped back, the critical question becomes who will respond? Without the guaranteed intervention of the US 7th Fleet, Taiwan would be largely on its own. Its own military, though capable, would be vastly outnumbered by the sheer scale of China's forces. The ripple effects across the Asia-Pacific would be immediate and severe. Japan and South Korea, both US allies with significant American troop presences, would face an agonizing choice. Do they intervene to help a fellow democracy and risk a catastrophic war with their powerful neighbor, China? Or do they stand by, signaling to Beijing that the old security order is truly dead? In response to this uncertainty, both nations have already started to dramatically increase their defense spending. Japan's 2026 defense budget has hit a record high, while South Korea is pouring funds into its military. An arms race in East Asia, once a distant fear, would become a present-day reality. The economic consequences of such a crisis would be devastating for the entire world. Taiwan is the epicenter of global semiconductor manufacturing, producing the vast majority of the world's most advanced microchips. These chips are the brains behind everything from smartphones and laptops to cars and advanced medical equipment. A blockade would instantly sever this critical supply chain, sending shockwaves through the global economy. Companies like Apple, Nvidia, and countless others would see their production lines grind to a halt. The result would be widespread shortages, skyrocketing prices for electronics, and a potential global recession of a scale not seen in decades. For people around the world, the effects would be tangible. The price of a new phone or computer would soar. The availability of new cars could plummet. News reports would be filled with images of naval standoffs and frantic diplomatic efforts. The crisis would dominate global attention, creating a pervasive sense of instability and fear. This scenario highlights how a regional conflict, sparked by a U.S. withdrawal, could quickly spiral into a global economic catastrophe. The interconnectedness of our world means that a crisis in the Taiwan Strait would be felt in households from Ohio to Osaka, demonstrating that American disengagement has a price for everyone. Now, let us turn our attention to Europe. Picture a scenario where Russia, sensing a fractured and hesitant NATO, decides to escalate its ambitions. It might not be a full-scale invasion of a major European power, but a more calculated provocation. For example, Moscow could instigate a crisis in one of the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania, perhaps by claiming to be protecting the rights of ethnic Russian minorities there. This would be a direct challenge to NATO's core principle, Article 5, which states that an attack on one member is an attack on all. Without strong, decisive leadership from the United States, the alliance's response could be slow and divided. European nations would be thrown into a security crisis unlike any they have faced since the Cold War. Countries like Germany, France, and Poland have already begun to significantly increase their defense budgets in anticipation of such a threat. Germany's 2026 defense spending is its largest since the end of the Cold War, and Poland now spends more of its GDP on defense than any other NATO country. However, building a credible and unified European defense force that can replace the capabilities of the U.S. military is a monumental task. The International Institute for Strategic Studies estimated that Europe would need an extra $1 trillion over the next quarter century just to fill the gap, putting immense strain on their economies. The human and economic costs would be immense. A conflict in Eastern Europe would trigger a massive refugee crisis as people flee the fighting. The stability that has defined the continent for decades would be shattered. Energy markets would be thrown into turmoil, as Russia has historically used its vast oil and gas reserves as a political weapon. Gas prices would likely spike across the continent and beyond, affecting heating costs for homes and operating costs for businesses. The European Union, already facing internal political divisions, would be put under extreme pressure, potentially leading to fractures within the bloc as member states prioritize their own national security. In daily life, the impact would be felt far beyond the front lines. News broadcasts would be dominated by reports of military movements and urgent diplomatic summits. A sense of insecurity would permeate European society, a stark contrast to the peace and prosperity many have grown up with. The dream of a Europe whole, free, and at peace would be under direct threat. This scenario shows that American security guarantees have been a cornerstone of European stability. Removing that cornerstone risks not only a regional war, but also the unraveling of the political and economic integration that has defined modern Europe, with consequences that would be felt across the entire global system. Finally, let us consider the Middle East, a region that has long been a flashpoint for global instability. In a world where the United States is no longer the dominant external power, Iran sees its chance to achieve its long-held ambitions. It successfully develops a nuclear weapon, declaring itself a member of the nuclear club. This single act would radically transform the security landscape of the entire region. The delicate balance of power, long managed through a combination of American diplomacy and military presence, would be shattered overnight. Iran's rivals, particularly Israel and Saudi Arabia, would feel an existential threat. The response from these regional powers would likely be swift and decisive. Israel, which has long maintained a policy of preventing its adversaries from obtaining nuclear weapons, might launch a preemptive military strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. Saudi Arabia, feeling encircled by an empowered Iran and its proxies, might race to develop its own nuclear deterrent or enter into new, more aggressive alliances. This could trigger a full-blown regional war, pitting a coalition of Sunni Arab states and Israel against Iran and its allies across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. Such a conflict would be far more devastating than any of the region's previous wars. The global economic impact would be catastrophic, primarily because of oil. A major war in the Middle East would almost certainly disrupt the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow choke point through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply passes. The price of crude oil would skyrocket to unprecedented levels. For people everywhere, this would mean a dramatic increase in the price of gasoline at the pump. It would also raise transportation costs for all goods, leading to higher prices for food, clothing, and almost everything else. The global economy, already fragile, could be plunged into a deep and prolonged recession. This scenario would bring the consequences of American withdrawal directly into the daily lives of people worldwide. The cost of the daily commute would become a major financial burden. Heating bills would climb, and the price of groceries would rise. The news would be filled with frightening images of missile strikes and burning oil fields, creating a global atmosphere of crisis. This hypothetical war in the Middle East illustrates how American disengagement could unleash regional rivalries that have been kept in check for decades. The result would not be regional containment, but a global economic shockwave, demonstrating that stability in the Middle East, however fragile, has a direct impact on the wallets of people thousands of miles away. For the United States, the decision to step back from its global role presents a complex mixture of potential benefits and significant risks. On one hand, the appeal of focusing on domestic priorities is powerful and easy to understand. For years, a growing number of Americans have argued that the country spends too much on foreign wars and not enough on challenges at home. Redirecting even a fraction of the massive defense budget, which stands at $901 billion for 2026, could have a profound impact. These funds could be used to rebuild crumbling infrastructure, invest in education and healthcare, combat climate change, or reduce the national debt. This inward turn could, in theory, lead to a stronger and more prosperous America. By avoiding entanglement in distant conflicts, the nation could save not only treasure, but also the lives of its service members. Proponents of this policy argue that the United States has overextended itself, and that its resources would be better spent securing its own borders and revitalizing its own economy. A less interventionist foreign policy might also reduce anti-American sentiment around the world, potentially making the country safer from terrorism. The vision is one of a nation that leads by example, by building a more perfect union at home, rather than by trying to police the world. However, the risks of this withdrawal are equally profound, and they could ultimately undermine the very prosperity the policy aims to protect. The American economy is deeply integrated with the rest of the world. Many of its largest companies, from tech giants to manufacturers, rely on global supply chains and access to foreign markets. The global stability that the United States military has helped to maintain is the bedrock of this system. If trade routes become insecure, or if major conflicts erupt in key economic regions, American businesses will suffer. This could lead to job losses, reduced corporate profits, and a decline in American economic competitiveness on the world stage. Furthermore, history offers a cautionary tale. The isolationism that the United States practiced before the First and Second World Wars did not ultimately protect it from global conflict. Instead, it allowed instability to grow unchecked until it became a direct threat to American security, forcing the United States to intervene later at a much higher cost in both lives and resources. A withdrawal today could similarly allow threats to metastasize. A world dominated by authoritarian powers like China and Russia would be less friendly to American interests and values. The difficult reality is that in an interconnected world, problems that start abroad rarely stay there for long. An American withdrawal would not just affect the major powers, it would reshape the entire international system and have far-reaching consequences for every country. The first and most immediate effect would be a global arms race. As we are already seeing, United States allies are rushing to build up their own military capabilities. From Japan and Taiwan in Asia to Germany and Poland in Europe, defense budgets are soaring. While this may seem like a positive step toward greater self-reliance, it also increases the risk of miscalculation and conflict. When every nation is armed to the teeth and nervous about its neighbors, the threshold for war becomes dangerously low. The political landscape would also be fundamentally altered. The alliances that have defined the last 80 years would be tested as never before. Some allies might band together to form new regional security pacts, while others might choose to bandwagon with rising powers like China, seeking to secure their interests by accommodating the new dominant force in their region. International institutions like the United Nations, which relied on United States power to enforce their resolutions, would be significantly weakened. Authoritarian regimes could feel emboldened to act with greater impunity, leading to a global decline in human rights and democratic norms. The world could become more fractured and less governed by a common set of rules. Economically, the world could see a retreat from globalization and a rise in protectionism. The free and open trading system, protected by the United States Navy, could give way to a world of competing economic blocs. China might try to establish a trade zone centered on its own currency and rules, challenging the dominance of the United States dollar. Disruptions to supply chains, whether from conflicts in Asia or the Middle East, would become more common. This instability would make businesses hesitant to invest and could lead to slower economic growth for everyone. The era of cheap goods and seamless global trade that many have enjoyed could come to an end. For smaller and more vulnerable nations, the risks are even greater. Without a superpower to act as a check on regional bullies, they could become pawns in the great power competitions of the 21st century. Their sovereignty could be threatened, and their resources could be exploited. The principle that strong nations should not be allowed to simply conquer weaker ones, a core tenet of the post-World War II order, would be severely eroded. In short, a world without the United States as a global stabilizer would likely be more chaotic, more violent, and less prosperous for the vast majority of the world's population. It would be a return to a more traditional and more dangerous form of international politics. The decision by the United States to step back from its role as the world's policeman marks the end of an era. As we stand here on December 22nd, 2025, we are witnessing a pivotal moment in modern history. For nearly a century, the world has operated under a system largely underwritten by American power. This system was never perfect, and it was often controversial, but it provided a degree of stability that allowed for unprecedented global prosperity and interconnectedness. Now, that system is being deliberately dismantled, and we are entering a period of profound uncertainty. The world is being forced to adapt to a new reality, and the transition will be turbulent. As we have explored, the consequences of this shift are likely to be far-reaching and deeply felt across the globe. The scenarios of conflict in Asia, instability in Europe, and escalation in the Middle East are not far-fetched predictions. They are plausible outcomes in a world where rising powers like China, Russia, and Iran are free to challenge the existing order without fear of a powerful American response. The potential for a global arms race, the fracturing of alliances, and severe economic disruption is very real. These are not distant, abstract risks. They threaten to impact the daily lives of people everywhere, from the price of gas to the availability of everyday goods. While the desire for the United States to focus on its own domestic problems is understandable, the hard truth is that America's fate is inextricably linked to the fate of the world. In our highly globalized age, there is no true isolation. Economic shocks, pandemics, and the consequences of major wars will inevitably reach America's shores. The historical lesson is that when the United States retreats from the world, it often ends up having to re-engage later at a much higher price. Maintaining global stability, while costly, may ultimately be less expensive than dealing with the chaos that could follow its absence. Therefore, the central question for the future is not whether America should be involved in the world, but how. The old model of being the world's policeman may no longer be sustainable or desirable, but a complete withdrawal risks creating a more dangerous and less prosperous world for everyone, including Americans. The challenge ahead is to find a new balance, a way for the United States to lead and shape a stable international order without bearing the entire burden alone. As we move forward, we must watch closely how the world adapts. The weight of the world, once carried on one nation's shoulders, is now being redistributed, and we must all hope it does not come crashing down.